growing things that are a little bit different. And so I use the "and now for something completely different" title from Monty Python. And a lot of the things here that I'm going to talk about are things that we normally grow, but they might be a different variety. You can't see Max the Wonder Dog. Max the Wonder Dog is over here. He won't lay down, but he wanted to be part of the presentation, so he'll be sitting here to the side. So let's just recap a little bit and review a little bit. This is the time to plant cool weather things. And so we're not just planting everything today. We need to know what goes into the ground now and what can't. And so the first things that are in this presentation are all things that are early planting. Find a plant by seed now, indoors or out, either way. And we have to wait on the warm weather crops. Next week, we're going to talk all about my tricks to get some warm weather crops in the soil. But those tricks that we'll talk about next week are not for the entire crop. They are for plants that just a few of them to start off early and see if we can make it work. We've had really warm springs. And so you might plant without any protection in that first week of May and be fine, even now. But anybody who's garden knows that when we get into May, you could go all the way to May 15, May 20 and get below freezing. And so that's why we call it a trick to plant early. So these are all crops that love cool weather. The first ones we'll talk about. When we get to the next ones, the warm weather crops, I'll talk about it. And then as we've talked about the last 2 weeks, and if you haven't been around for the last 2 weeks, you can see those as they are recorded. And let's talk real quick again about soil prep. That is the thing that gives us the green thumb by improving the soil, by adding compost. I see that municipalities still have been giving away the compost they make out of our leaves. Most nurseries now are opening up, and they are curbside service, all following the rules of social distancing, so you can get compost that way. You could get a truckload delivered, depending on how much you need. But every time I plant, I am putting in some kind of compost. That's just the way I do it. And that is what gives me the green thumb. And so a lot of the plants we're going to talk about are called heirlooms. And an heirloom is something that came into the commercial cultivation 50 years ago or before. And I'll tell you a little story about heirlooms. They became a big deal late 80s, early 90s. Because before that, and it was all around tomatoes. This is a tomato called Heart of Italy. I talk about it all the time. It's one of my favorites. My daughter discovered it at a nursery. She saw the name. My wife's Italian. And said, "Boy, Mom would love this one." And I said, "Okay, I'll pick it up." And I put it in, and we loved it. These heart-shaped, beautiful tomatoes that are meaty and very few seeds. And so that's an heirloom. And tomatoes in the 1980s, they were all the breeding money came from commercial breeders. And so what we were getting were these tomatoes that were thick-skinned, because that makes them easy to ship. And they all came in at the same time, which are the exact opposite of what we want as a home gardener. We want a long time to pick, and they don't need to ship anywhere. And so we kept hearing from people who said, these tomatoes that you're growing in your garden, they aren't as good as what we had before when I was growing up. And many of us thought, like, well, hindsight's 2020. Who knows? Maybe they're thinking of this differently. But then a tomato called Brandywine came onto the market, and it was an old tomato from the 1800s. It was a big, ugly beefsteak that one slice would make a sandwich, and it tasted just like that. It had that old-fashioned flavor. That started the whole heirloom revolution, and people started growing Brandywine, and now there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these heirlooms that are out there, not just tomatoes, but all different varieties. One of my favorite sources is called Baker Creek Heirloom Seeds. That's run by a guy named Jerry Gettle, and he started it in his basement as a teenager, and it's become a huge company. He travels the world looking for all sorts of weird and cool stuff. But these heirlooms, most of them were saved by families, and they passed the seeds down from generation to generation. And in some instances, one little town would be growing the same tomato until one of these seed companies would discover it. Another one is called Tomato Fest. 650 different types of heirloom tomatoes, if you can believe that. And they're the only commercial place you can find the one that I've given away for, geez, how long now? 20 years, called Limbaugh Legacy Potato Top. And so I grow a lot of heirlooms, but I also grow a lot of modern hybrids also. I'd like to try some of the new stuff too. The thing about the heirloom is if it's been around for 100 years or 50 years or however long, there's something about it that people love, and that's something to think about. So we're going to start off with a very, very weird one. I've been growing this for 2-3 years now. I've got some out in the garden right now. It's called the Hamburg rooted parsley. It was introduced in the 1600s, and look what it makes. The tops taste very similar to parsley, maybe a little sweeter, depending on who you ask. But then you also get these roots at the bottom that kind of taste like a cross between a carrot and a turnip. And I don't want you to turn your nose up at turnips. We're going to talk about turnips in a positive way. Some of these vegetables we're going to talk about you're going to be like, yeah, that sounds awful. Turnip, rutabaga, but just because they have awful names and they look like a big ugly root doesn't mean that they're not tasty. And I'm telling you, these Hamburg rooted parsley roots are great, and the tops are great. And again, it's one of those crops that I love to grow because you're getting out of that same bed, you're getting 2 harvests. You're getting the tops and you're getting the bottoms. And these overwintered for me, actually. I planted them in the fall and just sat there all winter long, and now they're going crazy. Don't be afraid to try something new for your garden. Basically, everything is better out of the garden. You know, I told this story last week. I hated beets when I was growing up, but when I'm getting them out of the garden, I love beets. And I've never found anything. You know, I always try weird seeds, stuff I don't even know what it is. I've never found anything that I've grown in the garden that I didn't enjoy or figure out a way to enjoy. And I talk all the time about, yes, it's true, dandelions. I talk all about them. And we're going to talk about 2 different types of dandelions. And first, as I always say, they are one of the most nutritious plants on the planet. I think that's kind of interesting. That's something that we all hate so much, that most people, I love dandelions, are always trying to get rid of. That they're really good for you. Every part of the plant is edible except for that seed that we used to blow as a kid. Now, for your wild dandelions, we're reaching a point here where you're probably not going to want to pick them because they're going to get real bitter. If you see that little bud in the middle, this picture does not have the bud in the middle, but if you see that little bud in the middle, it's bolting, going to seed, just like a lettuce plant would. And when anything bolts, it gets bitter, even more bitter. Dandelions are bitter. We let it go through the flowering process, then we cut them off, and what comes up after that is less bitter and very similar to our early spring dandelions. And all I ask is that you know that you're picking from a safe place and just pick a little inside green and see what you think. But there are cultivated varieties. I grow lots of different varieties of dandelion out in the garden that are made to be, those leaves are made to be picked. It doesn't flower. And so I have a question, can you grow Hamburg rooted parsley in containers? No problem at all. That thing will grow anywhere. And the same is true with these dandelions. And so you can find seeds at like a Baker Creek or other seed companies. And I know it seems crazy, and people think I'm crazy for growing dandelions, but when I'm growing these cultivated varieties, I'm not growing something that's invasive. I'm not growing something that's going to take over the garden. It just grows like any kind of other leafy green. It's the last thing that the rabbits will eat in the garden. They'll start on peas, then beans, then lettuce, and then they'll go to the dandelions. But I've harvested a lot, and these cultivated varieties are much less bitter than the wild varieties. And I always tell the story of a friend of mine up in near Mercer, PA, who grows all these greens for all the fancy restaurants in town, and 30% of his mixed greens is dandelions. He just doesn't tell them. So check out these potatoes. Yes, these are potatoes. We think of potatoes, as either purple or maybe white. And basically round, but look at these different shapes, look at these different colors. And every time we grow something with a different color inside, it's giving us different nutrients. And let me tell you, all these potatoes, yes, they're potatoes, but each one has its own individual flavor. And that's, again, the fun thing of growing these different things. This purple potato and these other ones, it's no different than to grow any other potato that you've ever grown. We've talked for the last 2 weeks about how to grow potatoes, and choosing varieties that are fun and different, especially for kids. One of the things I found out through the years, I love to have kids in the garden, is when you have different stuff, they're very suspicious. I told this story before, but any kid who comes to the garden gets the thing, you can spit it out if you don't like it, pressure off. But I found from especially my neighbors, I've got one set of neighbors, the kids now have grown up, but they've spent their whole life coming up and visiting me in the garden. I have some new neighbors with young kids, and they're going to come to the garden. They're going to eat something that they've never seen before. And as long as they don't have the pressure of like having to like it, it changes the way that many of them eat. At least for one of my neighbors, they're just like, they're so less picky because you gave them that orange tomato or whatever it might be. And so the same is true with the potatoes. And for you, you're going to love these different potatoes. And you can find them all over the place. You know, celery isn't grown that much in people's gardens anymore, but it is one of the easiest things to plant. It needs water, so I mulch it like crazy. But look at that one called Chinese pink. It tastes very similar to any other celery, but again, it has that beautiful pink color on it. It's not only an edible, it's an ornamental too. And then this giant Pascal is a great one, and that was from, I shot that in a greenhouse in Butler called Schnurr's Greenhouse, which is a pretty cool place. Celery is a fast grower, loves cool weather. You can find plants at nurseries. And again, it's just going to be in a little corner because a lot of people don't grow it. And I love growing celery. And the other thing about celery is you're not just picking the stalks. Every part of this, as opposed to some of the stuff that's shipped in for a grocery store, every part of this one that you grow in the garden is going to be sweet and tender. And so I'm using a lot of those top greens also in salads and in recipes. And that's true for so many things in the garden, is that the green part of it can also be tasty. All right, hold on to your hats. How do you like that? Does that look like something yummy you could taste a kid would want to taste? Yes, it's ugly, but it tastes a lot like celery. Again, another root crop, and I'm heavy on root crops in this presentation because all root crops store so well, whether it's potatoes or celeriac or whatever it might be. I know this might be a stretch for you. This can grow from seed, but again, when you pull that thing out of the garden and you cut a little piece off and you just nibble on it, you're going to be like, wow, this thing is really cool. I love to have these weird things and serve them when we can get back together again. Whenever that is, I'm going to harvest some weird stuff from the garden, and I'm going to serve it to people. And if they have the same same, I tell them the same thing I do the kids. If you don't like it, don't eat it. And again, you know, I have become a beet lover, but look at those beautiful concentric rings. Bull's blood is an old heirloom, also grown for its greens. And, you know, again, for me, I've been growing beets forever. But there was a woman that worked at this nursery down the street from me, and I was talking about beets, and I had my daughter with me. And she's like, beets? You know, and I was telling her how to grow them and how tasty they were. And then I just said, and boy, I'll tell you what, I love the greens too. And she had a funny look on her face, and I looked over at my daughter and she was just shaking her head because she doesn't like the greens. But I love the beet greens, especially sauteed with garlic. And so bull's blood, old-fashioned beet, but there are thousands of different beets out there. I showed one last week called Chioggia, named after an Italian fishing village from the 1800s. And it has white flesh with concentric pink rings. There are pure white beets. There are golden beets. It's a lot of fun. you're going to grow something. And believe it or not, just like the other things I'm talking about, each one of those varieties of beet has a little bit of a different flavor. And that's one of the fun things about this. And carrots do not have to be orange. In fact, orange carrots are relatively new to us in the last 100 years. Before that, everybody was growing purple carrots and brownish carrots, and now we just think of them as orange. Some of the purple carrots have purple flesh. Some of the purple carrots have orange flesh. Again, boy, I'm telling you what, you pull a purple carrot and you show that to a kid, his eyes will bug out. Their eyes will bug out. And you cut it in half and you show them the orange inside and you just give them a little taste of that. Adults too, whether it's pink, purple, white, just so many different types of carrots, short carrots, fat carrots, long carrots. Carrots, those long carrots need really nice soil. That's part of it, or growing in a container. But you can grow some little round carrots this big that will give you that fresh carrot flavor. Again, the greens are super tasty. But you won't have to worry about it. If you've got some soil that's only good down 3-4 inches, a shorter carrot will be better. Oh, chicory. Look at this is all called chicory, but we got radicchio in there. We've got endive. We've got all sorts of different things that are called chicory. And for the most part, these are Italian greens. As I said, I'm Italian through marriage, German Irish, but Italian through marriage. And so I grow lots of these different types of greens. Many of them are bitter, like a dandelion bitter, but they mix well with the balsamic and a little bit of sea salt, and that bitterness is the nutrients, and it's an acquired taste. But when you do acquire it, like I talked about this in my first week, that my kids, when they come back, they're in their 30s. When they come back, they want the salads that are made out of all this weird stuff because you can't get it anywhere else. Maybe a fancy restaurant, but the thing about it is you get these flavors, you enjoy these flavors, and then you have to have these flavors. These are all easy to grow in good soil in cool weather. Who would like some rat tails? That is actually the seed pod of a radish. And there are some types of radishes that aren't grown for the root. They're grown for the top, the seed pod. And we call them rat tails. I guess that's what a rat tail looks like. It's kind of disgusting. But even if you just grow a normal radish, just let it go. Let one or two go. Sometimes they won't head up. It just gets too hot for them. They'll flower, they'll put on these rat tails, and they're really tasty, and you'll get 100 of them as opposed to one little radish root. They don't have the texture of a radish root, but they have the flavor of radish, and when they're small, they're very tender. And even if you leave a few of those on, they'll get hard and brittle, and then you can break them open and save the seeds. I think for the last 2 weeks I've talked about this. This has become one of my favorite cool weather vegetables. This is tatsoi. Easy to find the seeds, loves cold weather, from the kale family, same family the kale's from, but very mild, fast growing, beautiful rosettes, really good for you, and anybody will eat it when you throw it into a salad. I love this stuff, and I've got a purple variety growing this year. Some of the green, you can see this one has kind of a yellow floret in there, very easy to grow. And I know it's like for you, it might be like an unknown vegetable, but you can find these types of greens at the nursery. And as I said, just don't be afraid to try them. Some of them are spicy, some of them are mild, some of them are sweet. It's just fun. And some of them are beautiful. This grows just like a regular radish, only it's bigger. And man, when you cut them in half, that amazing color is just astounding. Great for salads, great for a dish, tastes like a radish. I like to grow them early spring, late fall, and they can take just about anything. Very, very easy to grow. And again, putting that as a ornament on the side of a dish, people will just look at it and say, "What is that?" "Oh, it's from my garden. It's a watermelon radish." Two different types of fennels. One will just grow kind of a ferny top, kind of like dill, very similar to dill. The other type, and you've got to know which type you're buying when you're buying it at the nursery, will form this beautiful bulb. And I love to grow the bulbs. Again, it's a spring sowing of seeds, and I love to pair the bulbs with a fish dish. For some reason, fennel bulbs and orange juice go together in different recipes. It's fun to play with. But again, for me, I'm looking at different Italian vegetables and herbs because I love to cook in that tradition, and my wife loves to cook in that tradition. You might have find fennel for a Spanish dish or something else. It's a very commonly grown herb all around the world. Here's another really weird one, orach. This is a spinach substitute. Spinach will only go for into late spring, into summer. It will bolt. It will go to seed. It will become bitter. But this is a summer version. It's not a spinach, but it's a leafy green that gives you that sort of spinach flavor. Again, you find the seeds wherever you can find them. Either you order them online or at a nursery. And look at the colors. You're going to get all these different cool colors and a mild green that's super tasty. This is one of my favorites here, Mizuna. It'll take anything. It'll grow spring, summer, fall. It'll grow all winter. I grew a purple variety all winter long. The purple variety is sold at the end of the season as an ornamental. And so I know when we get to late October, early November, no one's going to buy them. I swoop in, I buy them in big pots. I put them into some area of protection, like a cold frame, or put a little bit of plastic on top of them. I love using these 3 mil drop cloths from the hardware store. They're cheap, they're thick plastic, and they form a little greenhouse out in the garden. Mizuna has this wonderful spicy flavor. That's what I love about it, and I love it on burgers. But there's a million different ways to use it. You can use it raw, or you can cook it. It's just a wonderful, wonderful vegetable. And this is the gardener's vegetable, kohlrabi. I think the only people that really, really love kohlrabi are people that are gardeners. And it's so funny because one of my sons every year asks me, I don't know why he asked me, because he knows I'm going to grow him kohlrabi. He goes like, "You're growing kohlrabi this year, right?" I said, "Yeah, man, I'm growing kohlrabi." Both the white and the purple one are easy to grow. There's one, if you really want to go nuts, there's one that a friend of mine grows called Cossack, like a Russian Cossack. And I'm not kidding you. It gets 2 pounds and it's huge, but it retains its tender flavor, tenderness. And kohlrabi, it's hard to explain what it tastes like. Cross between a cabbage and a radish, I think. And I like to cut them up raw. They can be cooked. I like to eat them raw, cut them up into strips, and just have a little kind of a creamy dip with them, veggie dip. Once you grow kohlrabi and you find a love for it, or your family finds a love for it, you've got to have kohlrabi. And again, for me, it was like the old gardeners would be like always talking about it, their kohlrabi. And I grow 2 crops a year, a spring crop and a fall crop. And that fall crop, the purple one especially, again, will sit there all winter long for you, and you can harvest something in the winter. Similar to a carrot, a parsnip. Some people say that parsnip is much sweeter. I agree. I love the sweetness of parsnips. Again, they'll grow spring, summer, fall, winter too. You leave parsnips in the soil for the winter with a thick layer of straw on top of them. You'll be picking them in the spring. Easy to grow. Needs not quite as nice a soil as a carrot. It's a little tougher. Again, another great container plant, parsnip. And they really sweeten up when you have that second crop at the end of the season. When they get hit with a frost, the parsnip gets super, super sweet. As do Brussels sprouts. And you can see there's purple Brussels sprouts. There's your normal ones, and they're a long season crop. So this is for somebody that has some room in the garden to grow something, because it's going to take minimum 90 days from transplant to get your Brussels sprout. And they are always, the rule on Brussels sprouts, do not harvest until they get a frost on them. Not that it's going to be bad, But things like Brussels sprouts and kale and cabbage, that frost changes the starches to sugar, and so they're sweeter. And for some reason, it seems to be more in the Brussels sprout than anything else. And so many times Brussels sprouts will sit out in the garden, and sometimes with a little protection, all the way through January, and still good to pick. Um, they're a heavy feeder, and they take up a lot of space. So you need space, you need good soil, and once they get going, they're good. Like all plants from that family, they're going to need protection from cabbage worms. Cabbage worms come from this little white butterfly called a cabbage looper butterfly. You see it in the garden all the time. It flitters around, it lays its egg, and makes any of these plants its host plant. So when those eggs hatch, you get cabbage worms. But we've talked about this before. There's lots of different ways to deal with cabbage worms organically. The easiest is something called Captain Jack's Dead Bug Brew. It's safe, organic, and it's not a poison. When the pest ingests it, it disrupts its digestive system, and then the bug can't feed anymore. And so you're always, any kind of thing, kale, cabbage, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, you're going to have cabbage worms. That's just the way it is. Leeks, just like growing onion or carrots, onion or garlic. And the nice thing about leeks, we do kind of the same thing we did with potatoes, where we'll kind of dig a trench. We'll start off either from seed or plant, and then we'll kind of hill them up. And that causes a blanching at the bottom. That's what makes them white on the bottom. And leeks are just kind of a mild version of an onion in a way. They don't bulb up. And again, very easy to grow and used a lot of times for soups. I love to grow leeks. Again, they need good soil. They need good soil, water, and mulch. And my favorite, this is one of my vegetable garden obsessions that began when my wife and I were served for our 25th anniversary. We went to Italy. First time I ever traveled. I was so nervous to get on that plane I couldn't finish my beer. Now that's nervous. But we were served this salad while sitting on the corner of the street in Rome, and it had rocket in it. I didn't know what rocket was, and I found out it was arugula. I'm growing 10 different types of arugula. There's wild arugula that'll grow like a weed. There are cultivated varieties that don't have those edges, that are just like round and soft and mild. I like wild versions. I like spicy versions, but there's many different versions. It's funny because Jessica Walliser, who we used to have a radio show together, and we wrote a book together called Grow Organic. We're good friends. She can eat arugula cooked, but hates it raw. And anytime she comes to the garden, I said, I got a new arugula for you to try. And she's like, all right. And she'll nibble on it just to appease me. And I said, what do you think? She goes, I hate it. Arugulas, love it or hate it, I guess. There are a million different types of eggplants. Now we have moved into warm weather crops, things that we plant on May 20th in our area in Western Pennsylvania or later. My mother always said it should be Memorial Day, but things have got warmer. We could probably get away a little bit earlier. There's really, again, we'll talk about this next week, but I do like to put some of the stuff in, a couple plants in a little early just to see if I can get them to be a little quicker. But most of them just love warm soil, warm air temperatures, and we're even pushing them when we're putting them in a Memorial Day, believe it or not. So eggplant is one of the most beautiful vegetables, and as you can see, it can be striped, it can be white, it can be dark purple like the ones we see in the store, it can be a lighter purple. There's a million different cool varieties out there, and if you love eggplant, again, there's nothing like an eggplant out of the garden. It's just like a tomato out of the garden. They're just wonderful. Here's a weird one. Ground cherries. Grows basically like a tomato, only prostrate. And you'll get a million of them. And yeah, you got to peel that kind of papery husk, but they, again, hard to explain what their flavor is, but sweet and tart. And you could eat 100 of them at one sitting. They're just to die for. One of the easiest plants there is to grow, and you could grow it from seed. Start it right now. on the windowsill and get them out there again. Third week of May. I love ground cherries. Here's a different type of bean. These are called runner beans, and this one is a very famous one called Painted Lady. Now, runner bean is different than other beans. It's a pole bean, but it's grown for its flowers at first. It will flower most of the summer, and then once things cool off, then it puts on these big bean pods that are real super tasty. But I like to mix them with my other pole beans. And so I'll do a vegetative pole bean. These are vegetative, but flower most of the year. One and one with the Painted Lady or another runner bean. There's lots of cool other colors. And so you'll have this trellis of pole beans that you'll be picking early, but then your runner beans will come later, but you'll get all those flowers during the season. It's really, really wonderful. They were grown a lot in these cool temperatures in like England, and so they got the beans sooner than we get them. But I love having just a few extra plants in there just for the beauty of the flowers. Like a ground cherry, tomatillas have a papery husk. Well, again, once you get hooked on tomatillas, you got to have one or two plants because they make 100 tomatillas. They grow exactly like a tomato. I grow them exactly the same up in a cage, the whole bit. And when they are ripe, that's the trick. You got to pick them when they're ripe. They're just, again, wonderful to snack on. Used for salsa, hard to explain the flavor, but when they are super ripe and soft, they're wonderful. Cucumbers do not have to be green, just like carrots don't have to be orange. The one on the left is what I'm growing this year. I can't wait, called Russian Brown. And I got it from a really weird little seed catalog. Again, it's probably the seed catalog that inspired me this year just to grow so much different stuff. And they say, even though it's weird looking, it's one of the best tasting. My daughter loves cucumbers, and I didn't get cucumbers in last year, and I heard about it. So I've got some of these started in the greenhouse. They don't like to be transplanted. So I grow them in little peat pots, which are like a fiber pot that when you put it in the ground, it kind of dissolves. And so you're not transplanting. But I'll also direct sow about May 15th. I'll watch the weather. There's lots of different white varieties of cucumber, which are super tasty. Again, there's a million different types of cucumbers. They all taste like cucumbers, but each one has its own individual flavor. If you don't have a lot of room and you want to grow a sweet melon, this is a melon that's like a one-person melon. This is one of my favorites called Tigger, T-I-G-G-R, like the lion or the tiger. And grow it up a trellis as a vine, and you'll have, 100 of these little guys on there. And if you can't use a big melon, these little ones, super easy to grow and super tasty too. But if you've got some more room, how about Moon and Stars watermelon? This was thought to be extinct. And people always talked about it, like old gardeners, like, I remember Moon and Stars watermelon. Well, they found some probably 20 years ago. Family farm had kept them going. And they call it Moon and Stars just because of the way those splotches are on the outside. This is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to melons. When I talk about Baker Creek Heirloom Seeds, he probably has 100 or 200 different melons in there. He's a melon fanatic. And if you want to grow something different, you want to grow something weird. Now, for watermelon, you're going to need good soil and plenty of room. Let them ramble. Anything, a vine crop like this, that's too big to trellis the resulting fruit. And so you've got to just let it run. As I said, probably the last 2 weeks, we call it yourself being a vine wrangler as you move them around to keep them out of the garden, keep them on the edge. But you'll get lots of great watermelons. And a watermelon out of the garden, again, that one's seeded. It's hard to find like a modern watermelon that has seeds in it. And I know that it's very convenient to eat seedless watermelons, but they don't have the same flavor as a seeded watermelon. And there's nothing more fun than eating watermelon pieces and spitting watermelon seeds, right? Here's another spinach substitute that I just love. It loves warm weather. It's called Malabar spinach. This one specifically is called red Malabar spinach because the vines are red. And they have these beautiful, glossy, heart-shaped leaves that taste almost exactly like spinach. Like, again, the spinach is gone in June. This thing will grow all summer long. It'll grow until frost. And you'll have more of this than any spinach you could ever harvest. Again, warm weather, decent soil, and some support, something to grow up. It's growing up my little windmill there, which since the front of the windmill has fallen off, so it doesn't make all the squeaky noise. I think my neighbors like it better like this. And I love this plant. I really do. And did you know that even up north here, we can grow peanuts? And again, when you pick a fresh peanut, it's not like the dried roasted peanut. It's a different animal. And if you're looking for something weird and different, you can get some peanut seeds, certainly at most nurseries or garden centers. And long season crop, you'll be picking them at the end of the season. They grow underground like a potato does. But when you pull them up, it'll be fun. Could you imagine a kid seeing that when you pull up, seeing peanuts on there? So these are, yes, sweet peppers, but they are cool because there are so many different varieties of peppers. You don't have to just grow a green bell. There are frying sweet peppers that are long and thin. There are purple, yellow, orange. Most peppers will, when they're ready, will go from green to another color. When we were getting those red peppers at the store, that's just a green pepper that has been allowed to reach fruition. And so whenever I'm talking about sweet peppers for our climate, always look at that little tag and see how long it's going to take for it to get to reach fruition. You'll see a lot of California Wonder peppers at the nurseries. For me, that thing takes way too long to make peppers. And I get a lot of questions when we get to the end of the season where people are saying, my peppers are only this big or they're not ready yet. Look for one that's ready in 72 days, something like that, 72, 80 days. And a lot of those frying peppers are, and they'll put on more peppers for you. You'll get more pounds of peppers with a pepper like that. And you'll get them sooner, and you'll get them to make that transition. If you've got the same pepper sitting there and the same variety, and one has reached that fruition, reached that red, and the other one's green, when you compare the two, the flavor is night and day. That red one is so much sweeter. And this is one of my other obsessions, hot peppers. Look at all these weird hot peppers. Got a question from Craig. Possible to grow a variety of cayenne pepper around here? Craig, you led me right into this. It's perfect. Yes. And I'll tell you what, hot peppers love containers. We talked about this last week. Hot peppers want hot weather. They want hot soil, and a big black container actually stuck right next to a brick wall will give you the best hot peppers. And all these different weird hot peppers in here, those green ones there, the jalapenos, that's not even hot compared to some of these. Yeah, you got to be very careful. And I grow some of the hottest peppers out there, Carolina Reapers and Dragons. But I'm not just taking that pepper and chomping on it. People can do that. I can't do that. I'm cutting them up carefully. I'm removing the flesh and the seeds. I'm sauteing them, and then friends come over and we've got a big glass of milk and some bread and we just nibble on them just to say we ate them. The reason people a lot of times grow these super hot peppers is they have a very unique flavor. And with the unique flavor comes the pain sometimes. That's why we're stripping out the seeds, we're stripping out the flesh. I have a really little sharp knife that I use for this, and it's meticulous work, but it's a fun little get together when we can get together again that I do every summer, where friends come over and we can say we ate a ghost pepper or we ate a Carolina Reaper. We weren't taking a whole Carolina Reaper and biting into it. That would be crazy, and that could make you really sick. And there's all sorts of funny videos online on YouTube that show what people do when they do this, but they don't know what they're doing. They might just think a hot pepper is a jalapeno. That's not a hot pepper compared to these. They have this thing called a Scoville unit, which rates peppers, shows you how hot they are. And when it says 1,000,000 Scovilles, be careful. And oh boy, I am again another obsession are different tomatoes. There's Heart of Italy again on the left, cut in half. There are just so many different ones. And the bottom, those little orange and red ones, that's Sun Gold. Sun Gold is my wife's favorite cherry tomato, a very important tomato to have in the garden. It's super sweet. The negative side on Sun Gold is it splits. There's a variety called Sun Sugar that's the same size. It doesn't split, but it's sweeter. And for some people, they might like the sweeter. For me, the Sun Gold has a little bit more tomatoey flavor. But I posted a picture today on Instagram, in my Instagram story. I have an early girl that I bought at Chapin's greenhouse probably 6 weeks ago, and I've got a place for it. Stick it in the greenhouse. It's already flowering. Now, again, Jessica Wallace, my former radio partner, she'd always say I'm cheating by doing that, but I don't care. I want an early tomato. You could go to a nursery, get a big tomato, put it somewhere until May, and grow it out. And you throw it in, you're going to have the first tomatoes of the year. And if it's, you call it cheating, call it cheating. But I like to grow different tomatoes, pear-shaped, round, ox hearts, tiny ones, big ones. Oh, I'm sorry. The other tomato down there in that corner in the white bowl is one called Juliet. If you ever see Juliet, it was a 1999 All-America selection. Whenever you see that All-America selection notification on there, it's a good plant. And Juliet, the trick on Juliet, it's bigger than a grape tomato, smaller than a sauce tomato. It has to be real ripe. And then when it's real ripe, it's got this meaty texture, but sweet, super sweet flavor, disease resistant. And it'll put on more tomatoes. One plant is all you'll need, more tomatoes than you can ever use. Here we go. Rutabaga, turnip. Come on, I can hear you cheering in the background. They're very close. Rutabagas, those stay tender as they get bigger. Turnip has to be pulled at a certain stage. They both get sweeter after a frost. Try a couple. I grow a lot of turnips for the turnip greens at the end of the season. Again, it's just another kind of spicy green that you can throw into a salad, throw into a recipe. But these root crops, again, they store forever. They have a sweet flavor, a potato-esque texture, I guess you would say. You can cook them, you can eat them raw. All I can say is give them a try. They get a bad name. Just the names just connotate, I don't know, maybe old school gardening, maybe, I don't know. It's just people have a negative view of rutabaga and turnips, and that they shouldn't. They're cool vegetables. The best pumpkin pie you'll ever make is out of this beautiful Hubbard squash, blue squash. Any of these vine crops like squash need good soil, need room to ramble. Boy, but it seems weird, I guess, for a squash to be the best flesh for a pumpkin pie, but it is. There's something about that Hubbard squash. Super easy to grow. Let them ramble in the field. They'll go. You're going to need room, and you'll get a ton of Hubbard squashes. And again, it's going to store for you forever. You know, not forever, but for months. And just this year, another AAS winner. It looks a lot like this, doesn't it? Looks a lot like that Hubbard squash. This is technically a pumpkin called Blueprints. Selling like crazy in the seeds in the nursery because everybody wants to grow a blue pumpkin for their kids. This is actually it could be a jack-o'-lantern, but it's also grown as a flesh pumpkin, a cooking pumpkin. Winter squashes, look at all the different ones you could grow. It could be different shapes, different sizes. You got a blue Hubbard up there on the right, but lots of different cool ones. These are easier to grow than even a pumpkin. Just again, they're going to take up space. On these winter squashes, though, you could use a trellis because the fruit isn't that heavy, and you'd be surprised how big a fruit can get, and a vine can hold on to it. And then you've got all your different summer squashes, or we call the green one there in the right corner zucchini, but you can see patty pan is a summer squash there, the yellow and white ones, and different colors and stripes. And the thing we hear a lot that we didn't used to hear is a lot of people growing zucchini and not getting a lot of fruit, where before, if you drove down a road that people had a lot of gardens, if you stopped too long at the stop sign, you would get a bag of zucchini in the back seat and you didn't know about it. There's pollination issues with zucchini as bees are struggling. In my garden, I do have a beehive, and I never worry about it. They're not interested in me. They're doing their job, but it has made my vine crops go nuts. I have doubled my cucumber harvest, squash, zucchinis. Uh, Very easy to grow, usually prolific, doesn't need great soil, and very tasty. Lots of different ways to eat it. First time I ever had a zucchini like that was when I went over to dinner when my wife and I were dating, and her dad made these zucchini on the grill, and I'd never had it before, and I was like, man, this is amazing. I'm going to grow some zucchini. Now I know we're talking about vegetables, but I threw some fruit in here anyway because they're edibles and they're super easy to grow, and you can put them in the corner of the garden. Black raspberries. Now you've seen all the red raspberries, I'm sure, but black raspberries look a little bit different. They grow just like a red raspberry, which is basically a weed. You never have to really do anything with it. All the only thing I ever do is like the brown stalks that die over the season, I cut those back. But then they'll just make berries for you all summer long, sometimes twice, if the season's right or if the variety's right. Again, something you could just put in the corner, needs full sun to part sun, mediocre soil, and will just be there forever. And especially kids just love raspberries. Don't confuse this with a blackberry. It's a different thing. It's a type of raspberry, but just a different one. Here's another indestructible, old-fashioned fruit plant called a currant. And currants, it's a weed. The only trick on currants is getting the berries before the birds do. They're tart, very tart berry. I've never made anything out of them. People make jam and stuff out of them, add sugar, but I just eat them raw in the garden. They're kind of a pain because there's so many of them. They're little. You just kind of strip them off and just like this, throw them into a container and bring them in. They're really good on like with vanilla ice cream. I like to throw them on vanilla ice cream. But once you have currants, you'll always have currants, and that's a good thing. Again, I put them in the corner of the vegetable garden, and like I said, the birds just love them. Now, wait till you see this one. This is called a pawpaw. They can be up to a pound. It grows on a tree, and it is a native. It is our only native tropical fruit. The flavor, again, I say mango, banana, but it depends on the season and how they turn out. They're hard to eat because they have those big seeds in there. But there's a great story about pawpaws. We were introduced to them as the settlers were introduced to them through indigenous Americans showing them what a pawpaw was. And Lewis and Clark, their entire party had to subsist on pawpaws one September because they couldn't scare up any game. And I'll just tell you this, pawpaws are kind of like prunes. So that couldn't have been a good September, but they are so tasty, so easy to grow. It's an understory tree. And if you know what it looks like, you can see them all over the place. As somebody who fishes out of a kayak, I see them growing along the banks of rivers, and nobody knows what they are, and they're just dropping these green fruit into the river, and nobody knows what it is, but it is to die for. And there are pawpaw festivals. Everybody's interested now in pawpaws. A local guy wrote a book recently about pawpaws. As I said, super easy to grow and just unique flavor. I love them when they're nice and cold out of the fridge. They say that it was one of George Washington's favorite seasonal fruits. And that's the thing about a pawpaw. The interesting thing, as a gardener, you're the only one that's going to be able to get a pawpaw. They don't ship. You can't pick them early and let them ripen. You can't pick them until they're ripe. And it's funny. The way to pick them is to shake the tree. And so I had a brand new videographer a couple of years ago, and before I went out to do a video on harvesting pawpaws, I put the bike helmet on him because they are a little scary when they weigh a pound, and you shake the tree, and down they come, and then you pick them off the ground. And I'm picking bushels of them, and the tree itself, it suckers like crazy. So you'll get trees all over the place as they go, but they're really, really, really tough to transplant from that situation as they have a long taproot. You can buy it from a nursery and you're fine. Got to have two of them. You put those two in the ground, they'll cross-pollinate. They are pollinated by flies early in the season. They have kind of little purple flowers, and there's a story that indigenous Americans would hang dead squirrels in the tree to bring the flies in. I don't know if that's true or not, but I'm not hanging any dead squirrels in my pawpaw trees, and I'm getting plenty of pawpaw fruit. But we're the only ones that can get them. You sometimes might see them in a farmer's market, but very rarely, just because they don't ship. You got to pick them fresh. And so next week, I'm giving you all my tricks for getting the warm weather crops in early, something I love doing. Again, it's not everything, but I always want to get a few things in earlier, want to pick something a little bit earlier before anybody else does in the neighborhood. So if you have some questions now, we could talk a little bit about what we discussed today. If not, we can move on and end the webinar, but we still have a few minutes. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Is there a question? You could also type the question into the chat if you have one.
I just unmuted everyone.
Okay, if you have a question, shout it out, but be careful what you say because we can hear everything you're doing.
Doug, would you talk a little bit about growing horseradish?
Say it again, Bill.
Would you talk a little bit about growing horseradish?
Okay, so I got a horseradish gift from a friend, and he had a great story about his horseradish. How his grandfather ground it, put it into a blender, and said, "Hey, Bill, come on over, smell this." And he smelled it and went right over on his back. He gave me that horseradish. Once you plant horseradish, you'll never ever be able to get rid of it. I prefer to harvest it in the fall, but some people will harvest the roots in the spring. I find it to be spicier in the fall. And to tell you how invasive it is, I brought some when I moved to this garden 21 years ago. I just put it in a flower bed to hold it until I could figure out where my vegetable garden was going to be, and it's been there ever since, no matter how much I dig out. It has these white fleshy roots, and if you've ever dealt with any weed that has a white fleshy root, you know how hard they are to get rid of. But I just have them in one bed in the vegetable garden. I get horseradish every year, and again, that fresh horseradish, there's nothing like it. It just has the power. And there's certain different ways to grind it as far as how much water you add. Some people add some ice cubes to get it real super spicy. Usually only lasts real spicy for about a month or two in the fridge. But if you find some roots and you can find them at a good nursery, you only need a couple and you'll have horseradish forever. Any other questions? You're all unmuted so we can hear everything you're saying. Craig, you got a question?
Yeah, I'm thinking about last week container gardening, and I'd just be curious to everything you've talked about today. What might be some nice containers with like items, or what's the word I'm looking for? Compatible items within a container from some of the things you talked about today that we can grow.
When we're thinking about putting a container together, first thing we think about is the season of plant. And so I would have a container with all warm weather. I would have a container with all cool weather. Then thinking, okay, how are we going to build that container though? So we put something tall in the center, something medium sized next to it, and then something that flops over, a vine crop out the sides. And so it's more about the season of the plant. You wouldn't want to put cool weather crop in with a warm weather crop because you're gonna have to change out that cool weather crop. Here's a question from D Lee. What's the ideal soil prep combo? Potting soil to compost. Also, to grow root veggies in a container, how deep should the container be? Well, let's go with the second question first. For root vegetables, it depends on the root vegetable. If it's going to be carrots, it's going to have to be 18 inches or deeper. If it's going to be beets, about 12 inches would work. Again, whenever we're talking about containers, Bigger is better once you get it in place because you don't have to water it as much. And so the more mass we have, the less watering we do. My soil prep combo, I'm not doing a combo. I'm doing straight compost, except for containers. The compost is a little heavy for containers, although I've done containers with compost, but I prefer to mix the compost 50-50 with what we call a planting mix. So if you get a big bag of something at the nursery that you plant in, I mix those two 50-50. It makes my compost go further. It makes my planting mix go further. And that mix works out pretty well as far as the density of it. I like something a little lighter. Any other questions? I hope you had fun because I sure had fun. I've had fun in all of them, but especially fun here because I'm fascinated by unique varieties, and I love to grow something different. I'm posting all my different stuff on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. You should follow me there. And so
Barb is asking if there was a preferred tomato plant for a container.
Yes, it's a great question, Barb. For a container plant, depending on the size of the container, I want to go 15 gallons for a tomato. Super Bush is my number one if you can find it, because it puts on like regular sized tomatoes. It puts on a good, slicer, maybe 10-ounce tomato. But there are all sorts of other ones that are be labeled nursery patio or container tomato. Super Bush is pretty easy to find, and it stays nice and compact. The problem with growing one of the a big tomato plant in a container is you're going to have to support it, and you're going to have to make sure that it's big enough that there's enough nutrients in that container to feed that plant for the entire season. And you can never let a container with a tomato in it dry out. It must stay evenly moist, or the tomatoes will get this thing called blossom end rot. And it's such a heartbreaker. You've spent all season long growing this plant, and then the bottoms will start to turn black. A good container for tomatoes, we talked about it last week, is called self-watering. And self-watering means that there's water in a reservoir below, and as long as that reservoir has water in it, the soil will stay evenly moist, and you won't have to worry about watering. All right. Thanks, everybody. Thank you. Any other questions in there that I'm missing, Aaron? We should figure out a way that we could get
they look good.
We should figure out a way that we can get together and see some pictures that you guys have of the stuff that you're planting and stuff. That would be fun. So next week, it's all about early planting of warm weather crops. I've got a million ideas on that, just like today. And I look very forward to seeing you next week. And I want to thank you very much. And I want a special shout out. Thanks to the people at Farm to Table for putting this together. It's important that people learn to grow their own food. And once you get the hang of it, you'll be able to do it for the rest of your life. And it's pretty easy. I'll go over it real quick. Improving the soil. I know I sound like a broken record. Getting the plants in at the right time, knowing when they go in. We're learning that now, and never let them dry out. That will give you the green thumb. Thank you, everyone, for being part of the webinar, and we will see you next week. And always feel free to reach out to me at my email, DougOster@comcast.com, for any questions you have. Thanks, everybody.